fortune today. Mike Wolf, a brother of our faith and a retired union steelworker who has spent a lifetime as a labor champion and activist, and whose son Carl Wolf is a leading member of our Hobart congregation, will speak first this morning about his experiences in the struggle for a more just and egalitarian life for all who labor. Following Mike, our second speaker today will be Caitlin DuBois. Caitlin is a sister of our faith who grew up in our very own congregation and who now works as a full-time labor organizer for a major union of hotel workers. She will be sharing her experiences in organizing the unorganized, fighting to bring dignity, power, prosperity, and hope to the lives of service workers on the West Coast. Our thanks today, as always, go to our consistently excellent technical crew of James Johnson, John Halstead as technical lead and moderator, and Valerie Lambert as church admin, who together make our remote worship possible. And we are again grateful this morning to our music director, Jeremy Jacobson, for his creativity, his singing, his music, his art. Now, take a deep breath and join us in a spirit of reverence as we listen to our prelude by Eric Satie, performed by Jeremy Jacobson.
Pete, I'm trying to unmute you. All right, we'll figure it out. Please join us in the chalice lighting. The words are not our usual words, but they're printed on your screen. In recognition of Labor Day, we light this flame to honor all work, including the work of our heart, our mind, our hands, and our backs, in gratitude for all the labors that support our world, and for all those who boldly continue the work of justice, equity, and peace.
A reading from Noam Chomsky, Professor Emeritus at MIT, author of more than 100 books, and a lifelong leading social justice activist. Both political parties have moved to the right during the neoliberal period. Today's New Democrats are pretty much what used to be called moderate Republicans. The political revolution that Bernie Sanders called for, rightly, would not have greatly surprised Dwight Eisenhower. The fate of the minimum wage illustrates what has been happening. Through the periods of high and egalitarian growth in the 50s and 60s, the minimum wage, which sets a floor for other wages, tracked productivity. That ended with the onset of neoliberal doctrine. Since then, the minimum wage has stagnated in real value. Had it continued as before, it would probably be close to $20 per hour. Today, it is considered a political revolution to raise it to 15. In a second reading The words of Eugene V. Debs, spoken in court, September 18th, 1918, the day his anti-war activism resulted in his conviction for violating the Sedition Act. Your Honor, years ago, I recognized my kinship with all living beings, and I made up my mind that I was not one bit meaner than the meanest of them on earth. I said then, and I say now, that while there is a lower class, I am in it. And while there is a criminal element, I am of it. And while there is a soul in prison, I am not free.
Thank you, Carl. Apologize for the short technical problem. Before we go on, though, I would like to give credit for those chalice lighting words to Reverend Florence Caplow, Unitarian Universalist minister and ordained Soto Zen priest. Now, let us sing together our opening hymn, Love Will Guide Us. Thank you, Jeremy. Please join me in speaking as one body, our affirmation of faith as displayed on your screen. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament. Service is its prayer. And this is our covenant. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. We will all now be unmuted so that we may briefly greet one another in community. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good
morning,
everybody.
See you all. Good morning. Hi, Robin. Hi.
See all of you.
Hey, John.
Hey, John.
Have a great day.
See you.
Hello.
Where's my camera? Oh, wait a minute. Switch camera.
From all that dwelling over skies, thy sons of hope and faith arise. Then peace, goodwill, all and peace sound through every land I creature.
Unable to gather unable at present to gather in person, this congregation expresses our greatest joys and deepest sorrows in new ways. We pause here listening to what arises from within our hearts. You may type in a chat box any joys, concerns, or milestones you have which you wish to share. Your joys, concerns, milestones, and comments will not be made part of the final recording, which is posted on Facebook and the church website. We honor the joys and sorrows we chose to share, so tender they remain unspoken within our hearts. We've come to the time of our service for our story for the child in each of us. This week's story is the true tale of farm worker organizers Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. Side by side, written by Monica Brown, illustrated by Joe Zepeda, and translated by Carolina Valencia, and read for us by our own Carla Banks.
In New Mexico, there lived a little girl named Dolores who talked so fast that her grandfather once said, "Dolores, you must have 7 tongues." Many miles away in Arizona, there lived a little boy named Cesar who was a very good listener. Cesar listened to his mother cry when his family lost its home and they had to become migrant farm workers. When Dolores was a girl, she moved to California with her mother and brothers. She joined the Girl Scouts and worked to raise money for soldiers fighting in World War II. Cesar's family moved to California to follow the crops and work in the fields. Although he had to drop out of school to work, Cesar always had a book under his arm. From her mother, Dolores learned to think of others. When poor farm workers' families had no place to sleep, Dolores's mother would let them stay at her hotel for free. Life in Cesar's family was difficult. All day they bent over in the hot sun picking lettuce, strawberries, and grapes. There was never enough water to drink out in the fields. Dolores grew up and became a teacher. She saw the farm worker children come to school cold and barefoot, too hungry to learn as well as they could. When Cesar grew up, he and his friends were hurt by the dangerous tools and had mean bosses who sprayed the plants with poisons that made the farm workers sick. Then something special happened. Dolores and Cesar met. Dolores saw that Cesar had great faith. His dreams would bring hope to thousands of farm workers. Cesar saw that Dolores had great courage. She would stand up and fight for what was right. Side by side, Dolores and Cesar began their journey. Dolores and Cesar drove from town to town, standing on the back of flatbed trucks and inviting farm workers to join La Casa, the cause for justice. Together, they demanded better living and working conditions for the farm workers. Cesar and Dolores asked people to stop buying grapes from California because the poisons the growers used there were making the workers sick. People listened, and the grapes rotted on the vines. The farm workers won. They got safer places to work, and the grapes became safer for people to eat. Cesar led men, women, and children on a 340-mile march to demand that workers get paid enough to live on. They arrived in Sacramento, California on April 10th, Dolores' birthday. Dolores gave an amazing speech, and the people were heard. The growers signed a contract with the workers, giving them better pay for their hard work. It was time for the farm workers to share in the harvest. Though they each had a large family, little food, and no money, when Dolores and Cesar sat down at Cesar's kitchen table, they always looked for ways to make the world a better place. If we don't help the farm workers, Cesar asked Dolores, who will? When the growers and the politicians wouldn't listen, Cesar stopped eating for 36 days so that others would understand how important it was to protect the workers. When their bosses bullied them, the workers used to say, "We can't do it. We can't win." But with the help of Dolores, they began to chant, "Sí, se puede." Yes, we can. For 30 years, Dolores and Cesar worked and listened and talked and marched side by side. Dolores and Cesar worked to help families stay together. They fought to pass the Immigration Act of 1986 that helped more than 1 million immigrants become United States citizens. Dolores and Cesar had many victories because they knew that together all things were possible. In 1993, Cesar passed away, and Dolores and the farm workers marched to honor him. Dolores still works and marches for justice for the poor, and she is not alone. The spirit of Cesar Chavez is with her, by her side.
Thank you, Carla. What a great story of commitment, struggle, faith, and friendship. It is now my distinct honor to introduce to you our first guest speaker today, Mike Wolf.
Can you hear me? Okay, I'm unmuted. Okay, so may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, my friends and comrades. I've been asked to talk about my experiences as a steelworker and a union activist. I went into the mill to win workers to revolutionary communism, to build a society of equality and justice. The first lesson, I'm going to talk about lessons. The first lesson I learned was that is really hard. I didn't go in a mill to fight grievances or to be a good union activist because the workers, they didn't need me for that. People have been fighting grievances and been fighting to make things better all their lives, and they didn't need me to teach them how to do that. The only reason I went, the main reason I went into the mill, I needed a job, but the main reason I went into the mill was to bring ideas of multiracial unity and social justice and revolution. But I learned that the only way to gain respect for myself and for my ideas was I had to stand up for myself, even against petty attacks. I had to make a stink. You had to stand up for yourself, because, you know, if you can't stand up for yourself, you can't stand up for anybody else. And if you want to talk to workers about a revolution, changing the world, you have to be able to get a guardrail fixed or a catwalk repaired. You have to do the little things to show that you're really about something. So safety in the steel mill is a big issue. You know, steel mills are hot, dirty, dusty, a lot of dust, molten metal. It's always a big issue. And it's a kind of issue that can bring people together. One of the first things I was involved with, I was working as a stamper in a slab mill. The slab comes out of the mill, and then it comes down and get the end cut off, and you put a stamp on it, an ID stamp. And so sometimes the slabs would get cockeyed and they come off the mill, come off the line, and it was kind of dangerous. I mean, you know, it was very dangerous. So we got a whole bunch of people together, all the stampers, black, white, and Latin. We all said we had this thing, we could invoke the safety clause. We're not working. You have to fix this. So it really brought people together, give you a sense of strength. It's a small, relatively small thing, you know, but it brings people together. You learn a lesson from that. You know, a lot of the grievances that I had to deal with as a representative or steward, more general word, were kind of, you know, well, a lot of them was about absenteeism, people coming to work late or screwing up. But there were these safety grievances that brought everybody together. And the other kind of issue that really brought people together, or was really affected not just an individual, but a whole bunch of people, were questions of racism and discrimination. Now, nobody in a mill, when I worked there, was ever told, oh, you can't do that because you're black. It was never like that. It was, you can't get this move up because you don't really know how to do the job. You're not qualified. So we would have quite a few of these kind of grievances. And sometimes you could actually get people together, not just the individual, but some of it, you know, who was being discriminated against, but some co-workers, and sometimes it would be a multiracial thing. So that was a very, very empowering activity. So in the mill, there's a legacy, you know, the mill is very segregated. So if you go to the coke plant, they're all black, except for maintenance, or almost all black. You go to the blast furnace, almost all black, except for maintenance. They were mostly white. Track gang was all Mexican. Machine shop was all white, mostly Serbian, mostly Croatian. So that's the way it was. And why was that like that? I think it was to keep people divided, to keep them separated. I happened to work in a mill that was more integrated. It was a rolling mill. So that was a good thing. But even so, even in that integrated mill, somewhat integrated department, people would come and work together, and they'd deal with their problems, you know, together. But after work, which is only 8 hours a day, after your work, you go back home to your segregated neighborhood. You go back home to your segregated school or your segregated church. So we made efforts to bring people together, but the reality of life in this country is that there's so much racism, it's so endemic. Now, a lot of us tend to think that racism just hurts the direct victim, the minority person, Black or Latin or whatever, But I've never really ascribed to that or believed that. I want to tell you a short story. It's a true story. So in the mill where I worked, we had bricklayers. And I worked in this particular department, and you'd see the bricklayers, they'd come along with their tools, and they were all white. And behind them were the bricklayer helpers with the wheelbarrow and a bunch of other stuff. And they were all Black. Now, the bricklayer helpers, the Black workers, they were in the union, the steelworkers union. The bricklayers were in a different union. So the bricklayers, their contract was coming up, and the company decided they wanted to break their union. So they were forced to go on strike. They set up a picket line, and nobody could honor it because it's a separate union. And I'm not saying that's a good thing. It wasn't, but we couldn't do that. But the bricks still had to be laid. And the bricklayer helpers, they said, "Hey guys, you want to lay brick?" And they said, "Well, I don't know. I'm not really happy about doing that." But they laid the brick. Of course, they knew how to lay the brick, but they were never allowed to be in the bricklayers union because they weren't white. So if there was ever a case of racism being chickens coming home to roost and hurting the people who were supposedly benefiting from it, that was it. So in my mill, we had workers from all backgrounds. We had Black workers from Alabama and Mississippi. We had white workers coming from Kentucky, Tennessee. I got my clock up here, trying to keep track of the time I don't go over. We had white workers coming from Kentucky, West Virginia, and so forth. And so they came from different backgrounds. And they came from places where they had never really intermixed or spent time with people of other races. But working in a mill, having the same problems, having the same issues, that changed people. I had one friend in the mill, a good old boy from Eastern Kentucky, from Harlan County. No, Pike County. The only reason he worked in the mill is because his daddy told him, "You ain't working in no damn coal mine because if you do, you'll get black lung like I do." So Ronnie worked in the mill, and he was I saw him change over the years, being involved in struggles, working with guys he never would have ever thought he would have anything to do with. But they had the same problems. They had the same crappy foreman, the same dirty working conditions. And he changed somewhat. He changed. So that's a lesson that people do change. Everything is hard and people can change. And racism is really essential. It's basic to what's going on in all of our situations, but particularly I saw that in the steel mill. So let me finish up with a couple of stories. They're true stories. 1986, the company, there's a Youngstown Sheet. Well, by that time they had changed their name. They changed their name about 5 or 6 times when I worked there. Changed the names to protect the guilty. At any rate, they decided they were going to cut the benefits, the health benefits for retirees. So we went on strike. And believe me, that was not an easy thing to do. This is not an issue that directly affected any of us, but it was a wonderful thing to see my fellow workers come together over this and say, we're going to go on strike. We're going to shut this plant down to defend the retirees. And it was a struggle. There was a lot of argument. There was a lot of discussion, but it brought people together, and we shut them down for 5 days, and we won the strike. They rescinded their cuts. In 2 weeks, well, maybe I don't know. That same summer, Hammond Valve, which was a small plant in Hammond, was on strike, and they were getting their butt kicked. Excuse my language. The company had brought in scabs, and they were running the plant. So because I think it was because we had this inspiration from our strike for our retirees, we were able to get together people. I know it was my friend Ronnie, Roger, Luis. It was a very multiracial group. We went over there one morning. We were all working midnights. There was a whole lot of people. It wasn't just my little crew, but there was a whole lot of people. We were able to shut that plant down. We stood up for the striking Hammond Valve workers, and we shut them down. Now, it was a one-day thing. The next day, the union officials, they said, no, I can't do that. And the police were there. Some of us got arrested. But it was a very inspiring thing, and showed that people can really stand together. You know, I'm going to end with this. There's this notion that everybody's selfish. Nobody, if you really strip away everything, people are only out for themselves. And I think that idea is out there because it benefits what I call the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, whatever. They want us to think that we're like them. But we're not. We're not. So the last lesson, I know this is a little disjointed, my last lesson is, the three things, everything is hard. Anything that's worth anything is hard. Racism is fundamental to what's going on to our lives, and people do change. And the last thing is, it all takes a struggle. And what did I say? Am I saying here? This is it. A life of struggle is a life well lived. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And before we go on, I just want to say that Wildcat strike, I worked for the same company in a different plant, and your guys' Wildcat strike saved healthcare for our people. So I thank you, not just for your talk, but for all that work in 1986 that you guys did for us. Now Cindy Hazeman will speak Bertolt Brecht's famous poem, A Worker Reads History.
Thank you, Pete. Bertolt Brecht was a German poet and playwright, one of the most influential playwrights of the 20th century. As Americans, you might be familiar with his most famous work for us. He and Kurt Weill did the Three Penny Opera. The reason why you might be familiar with it, even if you don't realize that you are, is if you're old enough, you'll remember Bobby Darin's Mac the Knife, and that's where it comes from. But he was also a poet, and this is A Worker Reads History. Who built the seven gates of Thebes? The books are filled with names of kings. Was it the kings who hauled the craggy blocks of stone? And Babylon, so many times destroyed. Who built the city up each time? In which of Lima's houses, that city glittering with gold, lived those who built it? In the evening, when the Chinese wall was finished, where did the masons go? Imperial Rome is full of arcs of triumph. Who reared them up? Over whom did the Caesars triumph? Byzantium lives in song. Were all her dwellings palaces? And even in Atlantis of the legend, the night the seas rushed in, the drowning men still bellowed for their slaves. Young Alexander conquered India. He alone? Caesar beat the Gauls. Was there not even a cook in his army? Philip of Spain wept as his fleet was sunk and destroyed. Were there no other tears? Frederick the Great triumphed in the 7 Years' War. Who triumphed with him? Each page of victory. At whose expense the victory ball? Every 10 years, a great man. Who paid the piper? So many particulars, so many questions.
Thank you, Cindy. And thank you, Mike, for suggesting that poem. This is a joyous privilege to introduce to you our second speaker, to welcome back home virtually our own Caitlin DuBois.
Thank you, Pete. Can you all hear me? Yes. Okay, wonderful. It's so good to see you all. And thank you so much, Pete, for thinking of me to include me in this service. Before I get started, my mom has been texting me all morning, mad at me for not including a recent victory that our union had in Seattle. I'm gonna put, if it works, to get back at her, a picture of her on the picket line in the chat. Oh, it's not working. Okay, never mind. You left out, Mom. But just wanted to share, we had, during the pandemic, which has been, I'll talk a little bit more about, we've been in a 1.5 year long fight with one particular hotel who has pulled the dirtiest tricks that I've ever seen, and a lot of my mentors in the union also have not seen. They hired over 20 security guards to intimidate people, to follow people. They fired union leaders. So really did everything that they could, and we finally got them. And I can't share the whole victory and the details of it because they are about to ratify their contract next week. But it is a tremendous victory for us in Seattle as we're trying to really grow density and a new standard. And so maybe I'll tell you all about it some other time, but there you go, Mom. Okay. So I don't know what this time has been like for you, but for me, these days I have grown to a new level of anger. An anger that at some moments I admit is accompanied by despair, but it is an anger that I have grown even more clarity around. I am pissed about capitalism. I am really mad. Years ago, I heard someone talk about how anger overcomes fear, how the emotion brings us into action. I have learned that understanding fear and understanding anger are central to any kind of organizing. There's so much fear we hang on to, and there is so much reason to be angry. Today, I want to talk about how I have seen the ways in which capitalism relies on our feeling small, divided, alone, distrustful, afraid. And I want to talk about how labor organizing at its core is about demanding our worth in the face of that, in the face of what denies us, us. I want to talk about the lived emotions of building power. I want to bring focus to how labor organizing is a declaration of the inherent worth and dignity of every person. I want to talk about how I have seen this in our union's leaders, and I have seen the power of getting clear on that truth and the ways that it transforms. Over the last 7 years, I have organized with my union in 11 different states. Much of what I have done is organize workers into the union. But for the last couple of years, I've been a part of contract fight and local contract enforcement with an incredible group of leaders, stewards, organizers. COVID has hit us hard. The hotel, casino, food service industries will be forever changed. There are jobs that will just not come back. Just a couple of days ago, there was an article in the New York Times that features many of our members. The article captures the anxiety of the moment, an intense uncertainty. A large part of what my work has been during COVID has been to extend healthcare, to do everything we can in the middle of a pandemic to prevent companies from ending insurance. There are some job sites where we have been successful, but every month there is a new group of workers, of families that lose care. In July, the New York Times reported 5 million workers had lost health insurance. And in this, I've had a story on my mind from 7 years ago, my very first campaign. It was an election where the company held captive audience meetings, which means they brought in union busters, forced everyone to sit in meetings, and proceeded to tell lies about the union, all of which was perfectly legal. I've since seen much worse, but at the time it was challenging. Despite this and the other tactics the company pulled, we managed to win the union election 2-1. This was a group of university dining workers who largely knew they deserved better. Many of them felt daily racism and disrespect from their managers, dealt with inconsistent scheduling that impacted their families, and were paid just above the minimum wage. Despite working for one of the country's most profitable food service companies, those who could afford the insurance, which wasn't many, would get cut off every summer. So for 3 long months, every year, they would go uninsured. So what did they do? When I would ask, they would say, drive a little safer, be more careful playing sports, time their doctor's appointments. When it came to one woman who had this big heart and tremble in her voice, she said, I have to choose. Her husband had serious back issues and severe migraines, diabetes, and heart issues. She told me, when the summer comes every year, we take all of his pills to the doctor and ask, which one will keep him most alive? Which one will keep my husband most alive? How many millions of people living in this country are asking their doctors that right now? Which one, which pill will keep my partner, my love, my husband, my wife, my child, me most alive? Which one? Anybody can become angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person and to the right degree and at the right time and for the right purpose and in the right way, that is not within everybody's power, and it is not easy. Aristotle apparently said that. To win in organizing, I believe you need at least 3 things. You need to know your own worth. You need an accurate, or mostly accurate, sense of your own power and a plan to leverage it. And you need to know the worth of others. You need to trust, like the deep kind, the kind that is also a little scary. It has to be trust enough to really rely on. Anger overcomes fear, and love sustains us. love reminds us it is hard to feel the value we all know we deserve. Love and trust can remind us. In the labor movement, we have to organize everyone. We have to try at least. We work with majorities to win an election, majority to ratify a contract, majority put into action. The more you have, the more you win. It is profoundly simple and deeply true. The more on a picket line, the more at the bargaining table, the more in the streets, the better the contract. 51% is never really enough to win. Because of this, we have to push to see the compassion and worth in just about every person. You have to listen, and we train our leaders to listen, to know people's stories and to be truth tellers, to be curious about what it is that is making that coworker feel disrespected, unseen, in struggle, unrecognized. To listen and to say, I see you, and I have a plan. I think you deserve better just as I deserve better. Your liberation is bound up in mine, then let us work together. Leela Watson, an Indigenous Australian activist, said that. When I was organizing in Southern Indiana, I met a young woman who was against the union. She was 20 or 21, and at the time I was probably 24, 25. She had a kid, and I remember starting to ask her questions. How old was her baby? Who else did she live with? What was it like being a mom? It was, of course, hard, she said, and she felt tired all the time. When I asked her how many hours she worked, it turned out she was working 2 full-time jobs, 70 hours a week. She hardly spent any time with her child. She never got a full night's sleep. She told me that if her manager stopped letting her bring home food, they wouldn't have enough to eat. When I asked her how much money she made, it was just over minimum wage for both jobs, less than $8 an hour in Indiana. I remember telling her, you deserve better. Wouldn't it be better if you made enough to just have one job? We were sitting outside, and she just stared at me and said, no, I don't deserve better than this. This is exactly what I deserve. No, I remember freezing. I just felt so sad and didn't know where to go. I'm sure she voted no. In retrospect, there are so many other questions I wish that I had asked her. I wish that I asked her what she imagined for her future or for her child's. But that was the first time in my organizing that I consciously realized, oh, this is not just about fear of retaliation or not having the right information or the decades of lies that we have been inundated with. This is about what she believed about herself, what she was allowed to believe, and why. Who does that serve? I know it's possible, slow, I think, but possible, to win in the ways that we all need, bigger. When I was in San Francisco to support the 2,600 striking Marriott workers at 7 different hotels in the city, it was my job to keep up a picket line. It was a 24-hour picket line for 53 days, and from 7 in the morning until 10 at night, there would be loud drumming and chanting. Downtown, you could hear the drums nearly everywhere you went. It became a part of the city. At each hotel, there was an encampment that we built that got filled with food and supplies. On the weekends, we would have the most extraordinary potlucks and barbecues. Striking workers would bring the most delicious food to share. Within a couple of weeks, I had a pack of kids who would follow me around, age 6 to 13, housekeepers' daughters mostly. We'd buy snacks and make signs. I would get them on the bullhorn for a few hours every day to give much needed relief to the picket captains. These girls started shy, but by the end, they were so strong, screaming with a fire at the bosses who worked inside and the guests who crossed the picket lines. They got to hear their own voices on a bullhorn. And they saw their moms and their moms' coworkers dancing on picket lines, making new friends and forming new alliances. Fear lived there too. Fear that they must have read, and especially as things went on when negotiations stalled. The powerful thing is that they got to see their parent move through it, move through that fear by sticking together. They got to see their moms win, and more importantly, what it took. In this work, I have seen women organize their workplaces, stand up to their bosses, and then go home and stand up to their abusive boyfriends. I have seen men unwilling to admit any kind of fear, finally admit it, and actually feel stronger for it. I have seen queer people hide themselves, get closer and closer with every story, every moment of vulnerability to being and feeling themselves. When we stand up anywhere, we say no to the power structures in our lives. That is labor organizing. Once you taste respect, you don't let it go, despite how fragile it can sometimes feel. The good news is that we can all do that. We can all say no to capitalism today and tomorrow and the next day. We can ask ourselves and others, who needs to feel their worth? Is it me? Is it you? There is no way to feel your own value or anybody else's and not be mad right now. So mad right now. Our pain under this system does not equal our power. There is a lot of work that together we need to do to undo the systematic fear that we endlessly breathe in. It will take all of us. Love will sustain us, and it will take all of us. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Mike, for your powerful sharing, for your, I just want to, I must repeat a couple of things you guys have said. Anything worth doing is hard. Your liberation is bound up with mine. Anger overcomes fear, and love sustains us. What powerful messages, and what great messages for Labor Day. Thank you very much, both of you. We have come to our time of offering in our service. While the music plays, you are invited to offer a monetary gift to our beloved community. The offering link will be posted in the chat box. You can make an offering now or anytime after the service as well. Let us sing our closing hymn, We'll Build a Land, performed by Jeremy Jacobson.
We'll build a land where we bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free, where the oil of gladness dissolves all mourning. Oh, we'll build a promised land that can be. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may them create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll build a land where we bring the good tidings to all the afflicted and all those who mourn, and we'll give them garlands instead of ashes. We'll build a land where peace is born. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may them create peace, where justice shall roll down like water, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll build a land, building up ancient cities, raising up devastations from old, restoring the ruins of generations. We'll build a land of people so bold. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may them create peace, where justice shall roll down like water, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. Come build a land where the mantles of praises resound from the spirits, once faint and once weak, where like oaks of righteousness stands her people. Come build the land, my people we seek. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may them create peace, when justice shall roll down like the water, and peace like an ever-flowing stream.
Perfect song for this day. Our closing words will be read by Caitlin DuBois.
Okay. So I'm going to read Our Deepest Fear by Marianne Williamson. I think I've read part of it before in previous services, but I wanted to read it in full, in part because this is the poem that I send often to leaders, to committee leaders, in sort of the hardest moments of campaigns, when that scary moment of, oh my God, are we gonna win? Am I enough? When those feelings come up. Our deepest fear. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us most. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about you, about shrinking, so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We all are meant to shine, as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give others permission to do the same. As we're liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others.
Thank you again, Jeremy. Please join me as together we extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you all for joining us today. There will be an unmoderated and unrecorded coffee hour, community hour conversation for those interested, beginning in just a couple minutes. Happy Labor Day.
So that was recorded, right?
Yeah.
So you could somehow send it to the kids and they